They told me I was lucky to be adopted by such a successful family. But love, I've learned, can vanish just as fast as it's given. After losing my foster parents, I thought things couldn't get worse, until the man I married turned my life into a twisted game of control, betrayal, and cruelty. I signed over everything, but not my spirit. My earliest memory is of a cold tile floor and a woman with red lipstick saying, "Smile, honey. Families are watching." I was 5. My name was Hannah then, and I was one of many little girls in identical dresses at the orphanage, lined up like toys behind glass. I don't remember the moment the Cartwrights picked me. I just remember the warmth of Mrs. Cartwright's coat as she pulled me into it and whispered, "You're safe now." I was 5 years old, and I believed her. Thomas and Margaret Cartwright were everything I didn't know people could be. They weren't just wealthy, they were kind. They ran a successful handmade furniture business, Cartwright and Company, and they let me help with things like sanding or picking fabric swatches. They told me I had an eye for design. They gave me love without asking for anything in return. I was their daughter, through and through. But nothing gold ever stays. My foster mom, Margaret, died of breast cancer when I was 19. We had just launched a new eco-friendly line, and I was supposed to lead the branding. Instead, I spent months sitting by her hospital bed watching her disappear. Dad, Thomas, was never quite the same after. He kept the business afloat, but his joy went with her. When I was 23, I lost him too, a sudden heart attack during a supplier meeting. Just like that, I was alone again. No siblings, no extended family. Just me and Cartwright and Company. I poured myself into the business, just like they would have wanted. By 26, I was featured in a local entrepreneur magazine. At 28, I met Michael. He was charming. Too charming, maybe. We met at a trade show where he was consulting for a logistics firm. His smile was effortless, his confidence magnetic. He said things like, "I respect women who build," and "I've never met someone so self-made." He was thoughtful, patient, or so I thought. We got married a year later in a modest but tasteful ceremony at my late parents' lake house. I wore my mother's bracelet. It rained right after the vows, and I remember Michael whispering, "It's good luck, babe." Turns out, the rain was the only honest omen that day. The accident happened 6 months after the wedding. A delivery truck ran a red light and slammed into the driver's side of my car. I woke up in the hospital with a shattered leg, 2 fractured ribs, and the haunting realization that I couldn't walk for months. I couldn't even bathe myself. That's when Michael changed. The sweet man who once brought me soup in bed started leaving the house for business meetings at all hours. The patient partner who once massaged my swollen feet now sighed loudly every time I asked for help. Then one day, he said it. "You know, maybe it's time you stepped away from the business. You're clearly not in a position to run things." At first, I thought he meant temporarily. That I'd still be included in decisions. But he brought in lawyers the next week. Made it sound like I was doing the responsible thing. That signing over Cartwright and Company to him would keep it safe. I was on pain meds. I didn't read every line. I signed everything. 2 weeks later, a woman named Kelsey moved into our guest room. Michael said she was helping around the house. I was in a wheelchair, vulnerable, and fully dependent. I couldn't stop what happened next. She wasn't just helping. She was his mistress. I wanted to scream. To walk. To run. But I couldn't even stand. Then came Caleb. He was maybe 15, scrawny, always looking down. Michael said he was doing us a favor. He found Caleb near a homeless shelter and hired him to be my babysitter. Said it like it was charity. I didn't have a say. But Caleb saw me. Really saw me. He knew what was happening wasn't okay. I don't know how or when the decision formed, but one night, when I could finally hobble short distances on crutches, I whispered to him, "I want to leave." And Caleb whispered back, "Then let's go." We left just before dawn. Caleb pushed my wheelchair in silence while the city still slept. The air was damp, and the only sound was the distant hum of traffic. I clutched a duffel bag, one I'd packed with what little I could manage, my mother's bracelet, a faded copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a flash drive of the original Cartwright designs, and a sandwich Caleb made with peanut butter and stale bread. It wasn't much. But it was ours. We took the first Greyhound out. I didn't ask where it was going. I just needed it to be away. Away from Michael. From the house that had become a prison. From the woman sleeping in my guest room. 2 hours later, we were in a village I'd never heard of, surrounded by misty hills and crooked fences. It was the kind of place where time moved slower and the streets didn't have names, just signs that said things like general store or used books and fix it. An older woman at the bus stop offered us a ride. Her name was Mabel, and she smelled like pine and peppermint. She didn't ask why a woman in a wheelchair and a teenage boy had arrived with nothing but 2 backpacks. She just said, "You two look like you need soup." Mabel brought us to an old cottage at the edge of the village, a place she owned but didn't use anymore. It creaked when the wind blew, and the windows fogged up like breath on glass, but to me, it was paradise. I slept for 12 hours that night. The next morning, Mabel returned with groceries and lavender tea. Caleb chopped wood for the fire, and I sat at the window trying to remember who I was before I gave everything away. I thought I'd cry. I didn't. The tears had been used up long ago. Mabel came every day after that. She brought herbs for my leg and showed Caleb how to cook real food. She had this way of folding laundry that felt like a blessing, every motion soft and deliberate. One afternoon, while she wrapped my leg in warm towels, she looked up and said, "You don't have to tell me what happened, but you need to know this. Men like him steal power. You can take it back." I didn't say anything, but I clutched her hand. Her fingers smelled like lavender and strength. One day, a man appeared outside the cottage. Young, maybe 20. Clean cut. Too clean cut. He claimed he was my grandson. I laughed. "Ma'am, I just want to help. You're not safe here." I didn't buy it. Neither did Caleb. Then he tried to force the door open. Caleb shoved against it with all his weight, yelling for help. The man started screaming back, pounding with his fists. My heart thudded so hard I thought it would stop. Then came voices. Lots of them. The villagers showed up. Mabel at the front, holding a cast iron skillet like a weapon. Someone had called the sheriff. The man ran. Later, I learned he wasn't just a scammer, he was hired by Michael. Michael had found out where I was. After the attack, I sat outside with Mabel, wrapped in a quilt, staring at the pink streaks of sunset. She looked at me carefully, then said, "There's something you need to know." She lifted the hem of my sleeve. There, on my shoulder blade, was a small, sun-shaped birthmark. She traced it gently. I was a midwife before I retired. I delivered a baby girl with this exact mark 29 years ago. But there were 2. Twins. I didn't understand. Not until she pulled out an old photo from a drawer inside. 2 baby girls. One with a tiny son on her shoulder. I stared. "You think I have a sister?" "I don't think," she said softly. "I know." And just like that, my story shifted. I wasn't just an abandoned orphan. I wasn't just a woman escaping an abuser. I was someone with a past still waiting to be found. I spent the next few days in a daze, replaying Mabel's words over and over in my mind. A twin. It didn't make sense. Nothing in the orphanage records ever hinted at siblings, let alone a sister. But that photo, those 2 tiny faces with matching dimples and one familiar birthmark. I didn't know whether to feel elated or betrayed. How could a part of me, a whole person, have been out there this entire time? Mabel had theories. The adoption agency was shady back then, she said. A lot of babies were separated and placed quickly for profit. Especially twins, they were harder to place together. The revelation sparked something in me I hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Meanwhile, word about the break-in had spread around the village. The sheriff came by and told me they couldn't charge the man who attacked us unless I pressed charges. I declined, for now. I was scared. Michael had reach, and if he sent one imposter, he could send another. I needed to lie low. But I also needed a plan. That plan came sooner than I expected. Mabel's real grandson arrived one rainy afternoon, knocking on the door with a sheepish smile and a bouquet of wildflowers. His name was Luke. He'd been away in the city working as a freelance photographer and only just heard about everything that had happened. I didn't trust him at first. But then I saw the way Caleb lit up when he entered the room, like he'd just found the big brother he never had. Luke was kind. Gentle in the way that men rarely are. He asked if I needed anything before he asked for my name. When I told him everything, well, almost everything, he didn't flinch. He just said, "You're safe now." It was such a simple sentence. But I believed him. Luke stayed around. Not in a cloying, hovering way, he just made himself useful. Fixed a broken window, replaced the squeaky hinges, even taught Caleb how to use a real camera. Every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me across the dinner table, his gaze soft but curious. Something was blooming there. Something I wasn't ready to name yet. One night, while we sat on the porch watching lightning crawl across the hills, he asked, "What are you going to do about the business?" The question hit like a punch to the chest. Cartwright and Company. My parents' legacy. My legacy. The company that Michael now controlled entirely. I don't know, I admitted. He made me sign everything. And I was broken. He knew it. Luke leaned back, eyes scanning the storm. "Then maybe it's time you start fighting like someone who's healing." He offered to drive me to the city, just for a day. To see a lawyer. I said I couldn't afford it, but he waved that off. Consider it a favor from someone who believes in justice. We left Caleb with Mabel and headed out the next morning. The city smelled like exhaust and overcooked street meat. But it also smelled like the old me. The woman who once wore heels and negotiated supplier contracts over cocktails. She felt so far away. The law firm Luke found wasn't flashy, it was tucked between a pharmacy and a taxidermy shop. But the woman who greeted us in the lobby looked like a force of nature. Tall, confident, with sharp eyes and a blazer that meant business. Her nameplate read, Jessica Dalton, ESQ. My heart stopped. She looked at me for a long moment. "You're Hannah." I blinked. "Yes. I think I'm your sister." I couldn't breathe. Jessica Dalton stood in front of me, composed, but her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she reached for something in her drawer. A photo. The photo. The same one Mabel had shown me. 2 baby girls, bundled in hospital blankets. One with the faintest sun-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. "I found this in a box of old files after my mother passed," Jessica said quietly. There was no adoption record. Just this photo and a note that said, Twin A, placed. That's how I started looking. I didn't even know I had a sister. I stared at her, trying to see myself in her eyes. We didn't look exactly alike. Her hair was darker, her posture more rigid, but there was something familiar. Something in the way she squinted when she was trying not to cry. "Where were you adopted?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Chicago," she replied. "Private agency." I never knew I wasn't biologically theirs until my mom died and I found that box. I sat there, numb. A part of me had always felt like something was missing, like I'd been living with phantom pain. And now here she was. My sister. A living, breathing answer to questions I hadn't dared to ask. But that wasn't the only shock of the day. When Jessica asked why I came, I told her. About the accident. About Michael. About the manipulation. The papers I'd signed while drugged and vulnerable. Her eyes darkened with every word. That's fraud. Coercion. Possibly financial abuse, she said, already pulling files and legal pads from her shelves. You never signed with an independent witness? No medical release? We can go after this. I stared at her. Why would you help me? She looked at me then, really looked, and her voice cracked. Because if someone had done this to me, I'd hope you'd do the same. And because you're my sister. It didn't feel real. But 2 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room with legal documents, digital copies of the original Cartwright design archive, thank you, flash drive, and a new power of attorney form Jessica had me sign. I wasn't just getting my business back. I was getting my power back. We stayed in the city for a few days. Luke booked a small Airbnb near the river, and for the first time in years, I let myself rest without guilt. I watched movies with Luke and ate takeout on the floor. He made me laugh until I forgot why I ever stopped. The night before we returned to the village, Luke brought out a box. Inside was a small silver necklace with a tree charm. I know it's not much, he said, but I saw it and thought, maybe it could be a reminder. That roots run deep. Even when you don't know where they are. I swallowed back tears. It's perfect. He hesitated. I meant what I said, you know. You don't have to do this alone anymore. And in that moment, I didn't feel alone. Back at the village, Caleb nearly tackled us with excitement. He had built shelves for my books, and Mabel had stocked the kitchen with apple pie and sage tea. It felt like coming home. But the peace didn't last. 2 days later, Michael called. I hadn't blocked his number. I don't know why. Hannah, he said, voice smooth, almost amused. Heard you've been making moves. Saw some interesting legal requests come through. I said nothing. You know, I really did try to help you. But now you've made this ugly. Dragging lawyers into it? That's not like you. That's where you're wrong, I said, my voice steady. This is me. The real me. The one who built the company you tried to steal. And I'm coming back for it. He laughed. You'll regret this. No, I replied. You will. Michael's threat didn't shake me, not like it used to. Maybe it was the necklace Luke gave me, still warm against my skin. Maybe it was the fire I saw in Jessica's eyes when she said, he picked the wrong woman to underestimate. Or maybe it was just that I'd already lost everything once, and there's a strange kind of freedom in that. I had nothing left for him to take. Jessica moved fast. She filed an emergency injunction to freeze any further transactions from Cartwright and Company's accounts and requested a forensic audit. It turns out Michael had been funneling company funds into side businesses, including one in Kelsey's name. Classic. Meanwhile, she pulled together a mountain of evidence, my medical records, video statements from Caleb, even old emails from Michael hinting at restructuring the company under his sole vision. Every paper trail he thought was invisible, she uncovered it. Within 2 weeks, we were in court. I didn't want to see him again. But there he was, sitting smug at the defendant's table in a navy suit that didn't quite fit right. Kelsey was beside him, flipping her hair and whispering like she was at a spa, not a courtroom. Jessica was surgical. She laid out our case with the calm precision of someone born to dismantle entitled men. When the judge asked why I signed over my company, she showed the photos of my injuries and the painkiller prescriptions still active during the signature dates. Your Honor, she said, my client wasn't just coerced. She was robbed while immobilized. This isn't a business deal gone sour. This is abuse. Michael didn't say much. His lawyer tried to claim the transfer was consensual. But the judge, an older woman with tired eyes and no patience, cut that argument short. This is not only unethical, she said, it's criminally negligent. I won. Not just the case. Everything. Full ownership of Cartwright and Company restored. Michael was ordered to pay damages, including restitution for all funds misused. Kelsey tried to file a counterclaim for emotional distress from being evicted from my house. The judge laughed. The next day, Luke drove me to the city office where I signed the final papers to reclaim my title as CEO. It felt like stepping back into myself. But a new version. This time, I wasn't alone in the boardroom. Jessica sat beside me. Luke waited outside with coffee and a camera slung over his shoulder. And Caleb, my sweet, sharp-eyed survivor, stood behind me, holding a sketch he made of the original Cartwright logo with a phoenix rising through the center. "I thought it fit," he said. "You know, rising from the ashes." I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I'd made it out of the fire and found family in the embers. Later that week, I took Caleb to a diner and asked him something I'd been thinking about since the day we left. "Would you let me adopt you?" He stared at me, speechless, then nodded so hard he nearly knocked over his root beer. "Yeah," he whispered. "I'd like that." Mabel cried when she found out. She said she hadn't seen this many full-circle moments in her entire midwife career. One sister lost, another found. A son born not through pain, but through survival. We all laughed. Then she made apple pie again. Luke and I, we were growing into something too. Quietly. No pressure. Just gentle moments, his hand brushing mine when we reached for the same book, him bringing me wildflowers from his hikes, or whispering, "You've got this," before court hearings. One morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of him softly humming in the kitchen. And I knew. He wasn't just visiting anymore. This village, this house, these people, they were home. 3 months after the court ruling, I stood in a different kind of office, one with soft chairs, a bowl of peppermints on the receptionist's desk, and a wall of inspirational quotes that felt just a little too optimistic for the weight of what I was doing. Adoption papers. Caleb sat beside me, fidgeting with the zipper on his hoodie. He wasn't nervous, not really, but I could tell this mattered to him. Maybe more than he wanted to say out loud. "You sure about this?" I asked gently. He looked up, a smile tugging at his mouth. "I've been sure since the day you took me with you." My throat tightened. We met with the social worker, who thankfully was nothing like the clipboard cold ones I remembered from the orphanage. Her name was Denise, and she spoke to Caleb like he was a person, not a case. She asked us questions, some hard, some silly, and watched the way we interacted like she was putting together a puzzle. By the end of the session, she smiled. "It's rare," she said, "to see this kind of bond form under such difficult circumstances. But it's real. I'll be recommending full approval." We walked out into the sunshine, and Caleb threw his arms around me in a rare show of teenage affection. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered before pulling away quickly, embarrassed. It was the first time he'd said it. And I let myself cry a little. Later that week, I went to the doctor for what I thought was lingering pain from the accident, maybe scar tissue or stress. The doctor frowned, did a couple of scans, and then smiled in that slow, knowing way that makes your heart stop before it starts. "Well," she said, "I have 2 surprises for you." I blinked. 2. She turned the monitor so I could see the grainy screen. 2 flickering heartbeats. "You're pregnant. With twins." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud in the sterile white room, my hands pressed over my mouth, tears spilling down my cheeks. Twins. Of course. It felt like the universe had come full circle, 1 sister found, 2 daughters growing inside me, and a son I chose. When I told Luke, he just smiled that quiet, steady smile and pulled me into his chest. "Guess we're gonna need a bigger kitchen," he said. That night, we sat on the porch with Mabel, who was already crocheting baby blankets. "I knew you were meant to be a mother," she said, her hands moving rhythmically. "You just needed the right children." Jessica came to visit a few days later. She brought onesies, baby books, and a binder labeled Prenatal Legal Prep. Only a lawyer would think of baby-proofing your estate plan before your belly. She also brought news. Michael had skipped town after losing the case. He was under investigation for tax fraud now, and Jessica's firm was helping build a civil suit for another woman he'd manipulated. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. Kelsey. She vanished the moment the money dried up. Funny how that works. But I didn't care anymore. Let them drift. Let them stew in their own unfinished chapters. I had my own story now. One I was still writing, page by page. That night, I told Luke I wanted to get married, but not in a courthouse, not in some white dress fantasy. I wanted something real. Small. In the village. With Caleb as best man and Mabel walking me down the aisle. He kissed my forehead and said, "Whatever feels like home." And somehow, everything did. We got married in the orchard behind Mabel's house, beneath a canopy of fairy lights strung between the trees and an arch Luke built from old barnwood. It was simple, unpolished, and so breathtaking it felt like magic had settled into the soil. I wore a pale blue dress, not white. White didn't feel right, not after everything. Caleb walked me down the aisle. He wore a tie he hated and shoes he scuffed 5 minutes after putting them on, but his chest was puffed up with pride, and that was all that mattered. Jessica sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a tissue before I even made it halfway to the altar. Mabel held her hand. Luke stood there waiting for me, hair slightly messy, suit a little rumpled, and still the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. When we said our vows, we didn't read from paper. We didn't recite anything traditional. I looked him in the eye and said, "You didn't just love me when I was whole, you loved me when I was broken, silent, and scared. You didn't rescue me. You saw me. That was enough. And now, I see you. And I promise to never look away." Luke took my hands and said, "I don't want perfect. I want real. I want your messy mornings, your quiet days, your fire. I want your past because it made you. I want your future because it includes me." There wasn't a dry eye in the orchard. Even Caleb was suspiciously sniffly, though he insisted it was just the pollen. The ceremony ended just as the sky cracked open with thunder. Rain poured in thick sheets, but no one ran. We danced barefoot in it, laughing and drenched, clinging to each other like the storm was our witness. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being loved. Not of being left. Not of being known. We returned to the cottage late, soaked to the skin, hearts full, and cheeks sore from smiling. There was no grand honeymoon. Just the three of us, me, Luke, and Caleb, eating leftover cake and watching old movies under a shared blanket while the rain tapped on the windows like a lullaby. A few weeks later, the adoption papers came through. "It's official," Denise told us. "You're a mother. On paper, in spirit, in every way that matters." Caleb framed the certificate. Jessica started calling every Sunday. She wasn't just a lawyer anymore, she was my sister. My best friend. She told me she was thinking about moving closer, maybe opening a small practice in town. "Big firms don't have apple pie," she joked. And I've developed a weakness for Mabel's crust. Meanwhile, the business, Cartwright and Company, was thriving again. Not because I was some powerhouse CEO, but because I ran it my way now. We switched to ethical suppliers, hired local artists, and launched a reclaimed and remade line inspired by the people who helped rebuild me. Luke started documenting the stories behind each piece. He called it the Revival Collection. One day, he showed me a photo of me in the workshop, hair pulled back, pencil behind my ear, eyes focused. I didn't recognize myself at first. "You look like a woman who owns her story," he said. "I finally do," I whispered. We moved into a bigger place that fall. Still in the village, still surrounded by woods and kind neighbors, but this one had 4 bedrooms, a porch swing, and a garden that Mabel insisted she'd help me plant come spring. Caleb picked the room with the bay window and painted the walls dark green. "Makes it feel like a forest," he said. He hung posters of galaxies and blueprints and taped his adoption certificate above his desk like a trophy. He was thriving, no longer the quiet, uncertain boy Michael had tried to control, but a young man who laughed louder, stood taller, and called me mom without hesitation. As for me, well, I was very pregnant. Twins, they said. 2 girls. The universe had a sense of humor, apparently. Sometimes, I'd wake up at 3 a.m. to feel them kicking, twin tornadoes inside me, and I'd just lay there, hand on my belly, whispering stories about their grandmother Margaret and her laugh, about their grandfather Thomas and how he once carved my name into a rocking chair just because I liked the sound of it. I told them they were wanted. That they were loved. That no one would ever take anything from them. And every time I said it, I felt the old pieces of me sealing shut. One night, not long before my due date, I sat on the porch wrapped in a quilt Caleb had made with Mabel, watching the stars blink through the branches. Luke stepped out, kissed my cheek, and handed me a mug of warm cider. He slid down beside me, resting his hand over mine on my stomach. The girls kicked in response. "You ready for this?" he asked. I looked at him, at the man who had walked into my disaster and stayed long enough to help me rebuild. "I'm not sure anyone's ever ready," I whispered. "But I'm not afraid. Not anymore." He smiled. "Then that's all that matters." We got married again a year later. A second ceremony, smaller even than the first, just me, Luke, Caleb, Jessica, the twins in matching white dresses, and Mabel officiating under the same tree where we once danced in the rain. This time, it wasn't about survival. It was about celebration. Caleb gave a toast. He talked about finding home in unexpected places, about strength that doesn't always look loud, and how sometimes, the people who save you aren't heroes, they're just the ones who stay. When I tucked the twins in that night, I looked around the room and saw a life I had built, not out of revenge, not out of running, but out of resilience. I'd reclaimed my business. I'd found my sister. I'd adopted my son. I'd created a new family. And I'd finally become someone I recognized in the mirror. Not the woman who gave it all away, but the one who rose, scarred and stronger, and took it all back. The girls are almost 3 now. Caleb's applying to design school, and his portfolio includes a line of modular furniture he made in the Cartwright workshop. Jessica opened a small legal aid clinic nearby. She and I go for coffee every Wednesday morning, and half the time we just sit in silence, grateful. Michael? Last I heard, he was still fighting lawsuits. I don't think about him much anymore. Because this is my story now. And it ends not with betrayal, but with belonging. Not with loss, but with love. And not with silence, but with a woman standing tall, children in her arms, whispering to the world. You didn't break me. You built me.